Saskatchewan. My name is Lindsay Dandridge, coming to you live from Saskatoon, the Paris of the Prairies, if you didn't know. When I found myself in Saskatchewan this year, I wanted to delve into a local project. So I'll be taking you through what I learned about the forest industry here and looking at it through the lens of mass timber. As an overview, I'll be talking about a bit about Saskatchewan in general, as well as the forest industry and what I learned in terms of provincial wood supply, current operations, and challenges. And the mass timber, what it is and why you should care about it. And then the feasibility of tying them together and the outlook for its production and construction here. And then future directions, ultimately what I think it will take to create that industry here and the implications of my findings on future research. So to accomplish this, I undertook a feasibility study using a qualitative research approach involving a review of literature and publicly available policy documents, coupled with casual conversations with industry, educational, and institutional experts who informed on my findings. So Saskatchewan is a province located in central Canada, sandwiched between Alberta and Manitoba. And I know what a lot of you were thinking. There's forestry in Saskatchewan. As a prairie province, it's known for its global exports of wheat and canola, as well as chickpeas, flax, uranium, farming equipment, crude oil, potash, and so on. And if you drive along the Trans-Canada through it, it looks just like this. But this flat prairie grassland terrain only covers about a third of the province. There's 34 million hectares of forest cover in the northern half of the province, with 11.7 million hectares of commercial forest in the commercial forest zone, this dark green patch in the middle on the map on the left. A similar setup to Ontario's area of the undertaking. So I'm down here in Saskatoon. It's about a 2-hour drive to Prince Albert and the southern edge of the tree line. And Prince Albert's the main forestry hub, sort of, in the province. And the commercial forest zone overlies the Boreal Plain ecozone, this map on the right, the light green in the middle. So the species composition generally is jack pine, black and white spruce, and aspen poplar, and some birch. And right now, the forest industry produces primary forest products, mainly softwood lumber, pulp and paper, and wood panels like veneer, OSB, and plywood, 75% of which gets exported to the USA, but some international markets as well. Mills are profitable and operating at or near capacity, but there's little room for value added. The products are harvested, sawn, and exported. And that's the end of it. So an interesting observation that I made early on, very similar to Ontario, is that Saskatchewan is operating significantly below its annual allowable cut, the blue line at the top, which in Saskatchewan is called the Harvest Volume Schedule, or the HVS. The dip here in the middle around 2008 was due to the recession, so they've kind of recovered, but it's still significantly below. So I set out to find out why. Saskatchewan forest management is organized very similarly to Ontario, where it's broken into management units or areas allocated to different tenure holders. So to investigate the HVS situation, I honed in on the Prince Albert Forest Management Agreement area, because they're the largest operation by volume. As you can see by this graph, the red represents the harvest volume by Prince Albert. And they're the largest by area. So this dark green on the map on the right, the dark green in the center is the Prince Albert area, surrounding Prince Albert National Park, which is this pink square. So zoning in on Prince Albert Forest Management Agreement area, you can see this crazy swirly map. Other than kind of the southwest, it's a very mixed species stance. There isn't really one location of like one type of species. So there's hardwood and softwood and mixed wood stands located throughout the entire unit. But if you look at the allocation of mills, they're all located along the southern edge of the commercial forest zone, probably for transportation and population purposes. So the distance to mills, especially the OSB mills, the pink little houses, is substantial. So where is the wood in these northern reaches supposed to go to be processed, especially the hardwood? The softwood has outlets in the pulp and paper mill and the sawmill, but there's nothing for the hardwood that's profitable. And the government of Saskatchewan prefers that entire stands be harvested at the same time, so they don't want you just going in to cherry pick the softwood out of mixed wood stands. So that leaves hardwood stands and mixed wood stands in their entirety just left untouched and aging, leaving them more vulnerable to fire and insect outbreaks. That being said, not all the wood, even that closer to the mills in the south, is merchantable. There's concerns over small, crooked, gnarly jack pine that just ends up in the slash pile getting burned. So an overall surplus of hardwood and no outlet for the smaller wood has led to lower levels of harvesting. There are rumbles in the government of a new mill, potentially an OSB mill, this red spot, going up in Prince Albert, but it's not finalized. So when I brought up in discussion the prospect of mass timber, specifically around the small scraggly wood, an issue that came up unanimously is that our wood is just too small, which demonstrated to me a fundamental misunderstanding of what mass timber is. So I could give an entire presentation on what mass timber is, but basically it's just engineered or composite wood product that is incredibly strong and can form the structural basis for mid-rise and tall buildings as well as bridges. It comes in many forms, some of which use milled softwood lumber like cross-laminated timber and glulam timber, which are the most popular types of mass timber right now. Some can use hardwood veneer like mass plywood panels, laminated veneer lumber, and some can use strands like laminated strand lumber and parallel strand lumber at the bottom. So basically any type of primary forest product can be the feedstock for a mass timber product. So the hardwood and the smaller softwood could be incorporated into one of these products, which ideally could solve some of the challenges for the forest industry. Mass timber is an important building material because wood is a renewable resource and is the only self-renewing material used in building construction. So it's been gaining momentum around the globe as a way to store carbon through long-lived wood products in the forests that replace it, contributing to the mitigation of climate change rather than causing large emissions like steel and concrete production do. But aside from its carbon-related environmental benefits, there's reduced construction time and lower costs. Usually, the studies are about CLT specifically, but it has a strong fire safety rating, which is a common misconception that I also found. People think it's super flammable, but mass timber chars really slowly and maintains its structural integrity under high heat. Plus, it has a beautiful and biophilic aesthetic inside and out. In terms of making mass timber construction a reality in Saskatchewan, though, I think it's a pretty long way off. I spoke with several professors at the University of Saskatchewan in civil engineering and urban planning departments, and they've all heard of it, but again, didn't seem to have a deeper understanding of what it is. So there's no mass timber in the curriculum at the undergraduate or graduate level, and no projects on their radar at the university. Equivalently at the Saskatchewan Polytechnic, their architectural technology and building sciences diploma program makes no mention of mass timber or building with wood outside of conventional stick framing. And Saskatchewan has the lowest number of architects per capita other than Newfoundland, which is another challenge to innovation. So ultimately the driving research that mass timber would need is just not happening here. And it's unlikely, though unconfirmed, that the current growth of Saskatchewan's major cities and those in the neighboring provinces would be able to sustain the output of mass timber production facility locally through their building growth. But US mass timber markets are booming, and Saskatchewan's central location on the continent makes it a prime exporter. The export routes are already there from everything they already export. So installing a mass timber production facility in Prince Albert instead of another generic OSB or pulp mill that they're talking about right now, I think would be a great diversification of the forest industry's portfolio, especially if lumber prices fluctuate or plummet again. It could attract outside investment, create jobs, and bring home the prize of value added to Saskatchewan's natural resource sector and contribute positively to the global fight against climate change. It's going to take a lot of cooperation and a lot of further research and development, but I think the potential is there. The wood is definitely there and currently inaccessible, unprofitable, or just seen as waste. So for production, Saskatchewan just needs to determine through further study, like the one that Farran is going to present next, the most practical facility given the type and volume of wood. And based on what's in demand in potential export markets. On the construction side, policy adoption is a big barrier because it's a new material and there isn't really established practices yet. And public education needs to basically exist to reduce misconceptions, especially surrounding fire safety, as well as inspiring architects, engineers, and urban planners to want to study and work with this material. So in closing, the tallest mass timber buildings going up around the world right now are about 20 to 24 stories. And Saskatchewan's tallest building is currently under construction downtown Saskatoon at a towering 18 stories, right there in the middle. So if we can get this ball rolling, I think the tallest building in the province could someday be made of wood. Thank you for listening. I didn't have any questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lindsay. Yeah, any questions from the audience?
I've got a question. If you don't mind, Patrick, I'll kick off the Q&A.
No, please go ahead. Thank you, Christine.
I was interested, Lindsay. It's cool to hear your perspective at the provincial level, and I'm curious your perspective after you've done some research, because I'm not super familiar with the awareness around mass timber. But what is it that you think it's going to take to put mass timber more on the radar? Like, is it communications? Do we have some perception challenges? Like, in your experience or your perspective, what do you think might help kind of that awareness?
I think we need to infiltrate everywhere. Like, I think it should be taught at least the graduate level in urban planning. I think it needs to be talked about in government. So I'm not sure how to go about that, but even like high level government officials I spoke with didn't really know what it was. So I think that would be an important first step.
Thanks.
I found it interesting, Lindsay, that you talked to Sask Polytechnic people. That's a very good point about the lack of research. And it's very true. After the crash of the industry here, no one is really doing much research at all into very much. We're looking at wildfire and trying to plan in a way that might mitigate the risk of wildfire, but nothing in the way that I'm aware of any new products. So I'm actually struggling with how we could make sense of it and implement it here, because it does have incredible benefits that I think you've brought forward. So, and also I would like to say you've hit on some very political issues here that are always sensitive, you know. And we do have lots of problems with the inability to use our forest resource, the whole resource. Large slash piles that are terrible from a stakeholder point of view. So I guess that's just a comment. I don't really have any good questions to ask you, except something concrete about how this could be brought to the province in a bigger way, which I think you've given us all your ideas.
Yeah, I think it's a little too big for my britches, but just getting the conversation started, I think.
Yeah,
we can do right now.
The people looking at new mills, there is a lot of work trying to get to figure out how to use this small stuff, and so yeah. I think getting to those people might be a really good step.
Yeah. So the next study, the next presentation, kind of delves into a little bit more detail, but kind of how to take those steps and how to like quantify the data in order to pitch a mill or build a mill. Hopefully that can answer your questions.
Yeah. So, I do have one. OSB, it's not considered any kind of mass timber product because you can make it into large structural things.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you can just like put more layers of OSB together with like the waterproof glue that's common in mass timber, and then mill it to whatever size you need to.
So OSB could merge into a mass timber.
Yeah, there's a parallel strand board and oriented strand or oriented strand lumber, laminated strand lumber. That's what it's called. Yeah, which is essentially just like beefed up OSB.
Okay, since that's the mill that seems to be talked about, maybe that's that's an approach.
Mhm.
They want to make OSB, maybe they could consider structural materials, more structural materials than just panel boards.
Yeah.
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 It's Andrew here, Lindsay. Did you parse out or make an effort in your capstone just to refer to any particular discussions you might have had with First Nation reps in the industry? Because up in the Northeast there with First Nations like Montreal Lake, did you connect with some of them?
I didn't connect with any Indigenous specifically. I did speak to Mystic in Meadow Lake, that is Indigenous owned, largely Indigenous owned and operated. I touched on it more in my paper. I thought that was a bigger issue to get into in my presentation. I didn't really know how to just breeze by it quickly in a 12-minute talk because it's a much bigger.
That will be interesting to see given the demographics in Saskatchewan and the amount of First Nation participation. So I'd like to get a copy of the capstone.
Sure, yeah.
When you're finished with it.
Yeah.
Lindsay, just a quick kind of big picture question on social impacts. Have you looked at all information on sort of employment per unit production and how mass timber oriented facility would differ from a conventional mill in terms of its employment impact in the province? Because that could be a very strong argument.
Yeah, that was kind of like one of the next steps, I guess, in this research field. I did not get into any quantitative data specifically, but fair round next, we'll kind of touch on that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Dean, you had a question that you'd added in the chat. Would you like to go ahead and ask? Well, I'll follow up with it because it actually reflected something that I was curious about. I'm not sure if you saw it, Lindsay. The question was, are there barriers to preventing the streamlining of mass timber in Saskatchewan? Are those similar to those in Ontario? And I guess I would structure that question a bit like, are these challenges unique in Saskatchewan, or are these problems felt in other provinces? And, you know, just to bring it back to an Ontario-centric perspective, did Ontario previously, was it faced with these types of challenges? And if so, how were they overcome?
Yeah, I saw a lot of parallels in Saskatchewan as Ontario in terms of like not reaching the cut and why, like it's small and merchantable wood. But Ontario is a lot bigger and a lot harder to access, I think, a lot of that wood. So they have more of a geographical issue, I think. But there was a lot of similarities, definitely. Ontario is still battling it. Like they haven't really answered it, except they are talking about mass timber a bit more.
Does that mean there are opportunities for, you know, nationally coordinated, integrated efforts?
Absolutely.
Or do you find it to be more based on a province by province sort of approach at the moment?
Well, I think like all the provinces are facing the same issue, so I think it would be really cool if we could coordinate something nationally. I imagine the situation is the same in Manitoba, but no one's really talking about that. But right now, every province is just kind of plugging away the best they can, trying to keep their mills full. And like that seems to be really all anyone's working on right now.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? We have a couple minutes left.
Hi, Lindsay, it's Anne. Just a quick question. I noticed that you had said that you had casual conversations. I think that was a bit of a, I'm not sure you wanted to use the word casual. You weren't able to do a formal questionnaire study using those methods. But certainly I know you spent a lot of time identifying the practitioners and the people who would, in various sectors, who would be able to inform your literature review and your document research. I just wanted to know if you wanted to spend a minute talking about how you planned those conversations to help your understanding with what was happening in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, so it's more structured than casual, but I didn't have the timeline to go through ethics approval to get a proper like formal interview structure. So I kind of just went into them first to know if they'd heard of mass timber, and I just kind of played off of their response to that question, which usually they had heard of it, but they didn't really know that much about it. So I would kind of explain the different products, and then we would just kind of snowball from there and just brainstorm more or less. Yeah, I didn't have like a questionnaire or anything.
But I remember in your planning for your conversations with informed participants, you were looking at representatives from government, industry, the academic world.
Yeah, I did try and get on all the legs of the stool, essentially.
Thank you.
That approach worked well because as you talked to one person, they gave you some leads and they would introduce you to other people. And so it kind of snowballed. So and people probably are way more relaxed if it is an informal interview than a formal one that you were talking about going through the ethics committee to get approved.
Yeah, so because it was more of a pre-feasibility, I just wanted to kind of get a feeling for it rather than quantify data and like tally answers and whatnot.
That's great. And I think this is an opportune time for us to end this conversation and move on to our next presentation. So thank you very much, Lindsay. You have stopped